You're listening to BioTalk with Rich Bendis, the only podcast focused on the BioHealth Capital Region. Each episode, we'll talk to leaders in the industry to break down the biggest topics happening today in BioHealth.
Hi, this is Rich Bendis, your host for the BioTalk podcast, which we conduct basically in the BioHealth Capital Region of Maryland, D.C., and Virginia. And we've been looking and talking to leaders who are external to our company, BioHealth Innovation. But we decided this time to do somebody internally, since we have a talented team of entrepreneurs and residents and analysts at BHI that you should be exposed to as well. And we're going to start today with Dr. Ethel Rubin, who has been an EIR with BHI for several years and also is an EIR at the National Institute of Health, leading the venture team. And Ethel, welcome to BioTalk.
Thanks so much. It's really exciting to be here today.
Well, we're glad to have you and glad that you have been devoting a lot of your career here to BHI and helping entrepreneurs advance their biohealth commercial ideas in this region and throughout the world. So let's talk a little bit about your background. How did you start educationally? How did you progress throughout your corporate career? And let's talk about how you ended up doing what you're doing today.
Sure, but I will preface it by saying I could never have planned my career. It's really a little bit crazy. I'm a trained molecular oncologist. I came out of the breast cancer research program at Johns Hopkins, where my claim to fame was discovering why developmental genes got re-expressed in adult cancers, what kind of advantage it would give cancer cells. So here I was, a regular scientist, and I knew pretty much at that point that I wasn't going to go the academic route. So I looked for other opportunities, and lo and behold, met a lot of interesting people, including entrepreneurs and a very interesting company, BioFortis, that at the time was just spinning out of Hopkins. So I was employee number 4. Fast forward all these years, and now I am a commercial expert. I've launched over 25 products in the market, generating probably $1 billion of revenue, of which I really get nothing. The patients are benefiting, the biotech industry is benefiting, and it's really been a feather in my cap to have my name on such amazing products that are helping people around the world and having worked with amazing teams. So I did 2 startups in Maryland, one of which was BioFortis, which we exited last year. I started my own consulting firm for business development opportunities, going into white space opportunities for large global corporates, as well as opportunities for VCs, because I'm so connected really within the early stage commercial market. From there, I went to Medtronic for the first 2 years. I worked within the cardiovascular group, managing a territory for them, running up and down the East Coast. It was pretty intense, but again, I met fantastic people. And then I went in-house for just over 4 years, where I ran global clinical strategy for one of the business units, again, within the cardiovascular group. So I've launched products. I've had the opportunity on working on first-in-class products, life-saving products. Think about, the world's first cryoballoon for AFib ablation, the world's first MRI-compatible implantable devices, drug-device combinations, very, very unique technologies, and it was an amazing experience. During that time, we acquired a very large company, Covidian, and I was part of the clinical integration team. It was very eye-opening, but I knew what I really wanted to do was corporate ventures. And I was headed along that route when along came this fellow, Rich Bendis, and convinced me to come back to Maryland and do some amazing things here for our companies. And I guess I was just the right person at the right time, having the background both on medtech, biotech, funding. We had a fund at Medtronic, which we seeded technology development and clinical evidence generation around the world. I would say that my favorite part really was working with physicians to get these products to market. So here I am trying to do the same thing for our companies here.
Well, we're glad you came back, Ethel.
Thank you.
And for those, and I bet you there's very few listeners who don't know what Medtronic is or does, give a little background on Medtronic as a corporation and, how broad it is around the world.
Well, it is a Fortune 100 publicly listed company. Every second, somebody is getting treated or implanted with one of their devices or using one of their technologies. They've got 4 business units, multi-billion-dollar market cap. It is probably the world's largest medical device company, certainly on the implantable side. Think on the order of a J&J. It's headquartered right now in Dublin. We had to get domiciled as part of the COVID acquisition. We were domiciled outside the country, but our U.S. headquarters was in Minneapolis in the Twin Cities region. And just really a fantastic company to work for. Learned so much, met amazing physicians around the world, and got a chance to see, after working in a couple of smaller companies, much smaller companies, including one startup, what it was like to be at a global corporate.
And tell me a little bit about what made you change. You were on a great career path with Medtronic, and then all of a sudden there's this opportunity in Maryland to get involved with a nonprofit BioHealth innovation, as well as potentially interact with the National Institute of Health. That's a major transition for someone who's on a nice career path with Medtronic. So what was it that triggered this change for you?
So a couple of things. So first of all, when you're working on product development and product launches, products eventually mature, and then they go into the hands of marketing. And it's not quite as exciting anymore, right? So there's limited opportunity in a global corporate to keep staying in at the, very exciting early product development concepts that end up becoming blockbusters. You may have one or two or three of those in your lifetime. And here I was the cryoballoon lady around the world, and everybody who had any kind of an idea for another therapy, be it a drug or a device or a digital health for AFib, would approach me. I was limited in what I could do with that. If it was a company that Medtronic would perhaps want to look at, well, then I brought it to business development. If it was a concept that we could develop together, well, then we could seed fund some of that research. But, what happened after that becomes really much more of a corporate decision. When I saw what was going on here with BioHealth innovation and, in Maryland, it brought me closer to my roots. The entrepreneurial experience, really translational opportunities of taking advances from the bench to the bedside, and how to develop those concepts and work them through the different stage gates of development. I felt that it was really coming back to my roots to come back here and work within the entrepreneurial environment again. So it was very exciting to go back to that and be able to really make an impact on next-gen therapies, next-gen diagnostics and devices.
And we're talking with Dr. Ethel Rubin, who's an entrepreneur in residence at BioHealth Innovation and NIH. And I use the term entrepreneur in residence as if all the listeners for BioTalk know what one is. But that term is thrown around very loosely and has many different connotations based on where EIRs, which is the abbreviation for entrepreneur in residence, reside, whether it be a venture capital firm, a corporation, an incubator. But let's talk in terms of what you as an EIR for BioHealth Innovation and NIH actually do.
So to sum it up in one single sentence, we prepare and connect companies with capital. And that includes a lot of different things. Like you said, entrepreneur in residence means one thing in the venture capital world. Executives in residence might mean something different in a tech transfer office, for example. But what we do for the NIH-backed companies is we are an objective, experienced opportunity or resource for companies that have funding from NIH on their corporate strategy, on their product development strategy, and on their funding strategy. So we will help companies to prepare for funding. We will help to make sure that they have the appropriate materials, are prepared for discussions for investors. We will open the doors for investors. We will teach them, train them, and get them prepared for finding investors on their own. When they're in the middle of talking about terms, we will educate them on what various terms are. We will review deals with them. We will help them to negotiate the waters of term sheets from investors, partnering deals, and we're really an objective resource. We don't take the place of your lawyer. We don't take the place of your CEO. We are working with you to give you an objective ear from very experienced people. And to that end, I recruited my new entrepreneur in residence who's working with me on my team, John Sullivan, came over to us from Cardinal Health. He has both corporate experience, had actually run a fund himself, and has already been an entrepreneur that has exited companies. So he's a perfect example of somebody who's been there, done that. And again, we are not profiting from anything that the company is doing. We get paid by BioHealth Innovation and NIH to do what we do to help companies make progress. And it's really a credit to the NIH that they are bringing in experienced business people to do this. There is no other organization in the world that has really invested in this kind of an idea to leverage the dollars that they're already putting in companies to make them successful. So while we are not traditional entrepreneurs in residence like VC, where we will actually take the leadership of the company and run with it, we're not taking over the management. We're working with the management to prepare them and get them the private financing to get them to a valuation inflection point, get them to the point that they would be appropriate for partnering or would be of interest for a large pharma to partner with them or to be acquired by a large strategic.
A lot of the listeners probably don't understand the vastness of the NIH budget, but it's approaching $40 billion right now. And there's also an extramural component and an intramural component. And extramural primarily are those funds which go out throughout the United States to support academic researchers as well as small businesses through the SBIR program. And intramural is the 6,000 scientists which we have right here in Maryland who are doing research, and they get about 10% of that budget. Now, one of the things you've done since you've come there is coined this money that the NIH invests through the SBIR program as America's largest seed fund. Is that what you call it?
Actually, it's the world's largest early-stage biotech investment fund.
Ah, okay.
It's non-dilutive money, so I'll explain a little bit how it works. But it's really quite remarkable. As you mentioned, the vast majority of NIH funding goes out into the extramural space. The research that is conducted in practically every university in the United States. But a small percent of that is reserved to back companies. Unlike traditional investors, when NIH gives you a grant or a contract, it's non-dilutive. They will not take equity in your company. But unlike a grant, they actually expect you to use that money towards the development of your product, whatever innovation you are working on. It's really an amazing program. It is a treasure for the United States. I have had entrepreneurs who have told me point blank they would not be where they were without that funding. I'm not saying it's easy money to get. There are stats on their website for the likelihood or the percent of first-time applicants that get the money. The chances of getting that money are still 100 times easier than VC or maybe even angel funds who see hundreds and hundreds or maybe thousands of deals a year and maybe only do a few. So it's not easy money to get, but when you get it, it is great. When I first came to NIH, just to be clear, I came to the Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, the NHLBI. They also had an office there of translational alliances and coordination, the brainchild of Dr. Jody Black, who I still work for now in the office of the director. She put together this office, again, to help do the next thing for what we really need in this country in terms of translating research discoveries into life-saving products. So she created this specifically within the heart, lung, and blood space, and they had experimented with a $65 million fund, part of which was just for heart, lung, and blood, and the other part would be trans NIH mission space, which is basically any therapy area, I would say, to seed the product development ideas that were coming from scientists and physicians and surgeons in certain academic institutes which won these awards. And the goal was to put up to $200,000 of our NIH money together with a one-to-one match from the university or the academic institute that had got the grant to see if they could help propel the product idea that this physician or researcher had. And that program was called the NIH Centers for Accelerated Innovation. The Trans NIH program was called REACH. And when I initially came there, it was to create and to run this investment review board, which would look at these product concepts that physicians had to learn to express in terms of the market opportunity, the go-to-market strategy, the budget that would require for development, the potential exit strategy. And we would look at these applications for funding together with really an investment review board to make, I wouldn't say go, no-go decisions, because ultimately we gave our feedback to the university and they had to come to their own conclusions. If I came back and said to them, this is not going to fly by FDA, or it's going to need the following things to get through FDA, they would have to decide if indeed they were going to seed fund it. But it was a tremendously successful program. It's still ongoing. And 33 companies have been spun out, have gone on to raise or exit for $500 million, and it is ongoing. When Jody asked me to come to the Office of the Director to work within the SBIR program, I obviously looked at it as a tremendous opportunity to help actual companies to make progress and get to these inflection points. But the idea was that if NIH was backing these companies in order to get the product, they really wouldn't be able to succeed unless the companies were strong and investable entities. And that is what we are doing with the SBIR portfolio. So to date, there's over $1 billion a year put into just over 1,000 companies a year. There are a couple of different kinds of grants. 24 of the 27 institutes participate in a variety of those grants. The grants that all institutes that participate in the program have are phase 1 grants, which is for early proof of concept, and phase 2 grants, which is much more towards product development. Some also have phase 2B grants, which is really geared for companies that are headed towards the commercial space. And Congress just reauthorized the Commercialization Readiness Program, which a few later stage companies will be able to get $3 million over 3 years to be able to use for commercial purposes, including regulatory and manufacturing.
So you mentioned the different phases, phase 1, phase 2. Talk a little bit about the win percentage rate of someone who wins a phase 1. How much money can they get in a phase 1? How long does it take generally for that process to materialize? Then similarly for a phase 2. And as you know, BioHealth Innovation, one of the things we do is to try to fill the gap of trying to get more of the people within the BioHealth Capital Region competitive with the SBIR programs, and our success rate is much higher than those who would go after these grants by themselves. But let's talk a little bit from your perspective about how they work, how much money they can get at each of these different stages. And in my opinion, it's the greatest non-dilutive funding that I can have seen anywhere else in the United States.
It's actually anywhere else in the world. There is no federal government that backs companies like we do for the amounts that we do and at the scale that we do. So that is why it really is the world's largest early stage biotech investment fund. So the stats are actually on the SBIR website. I really couldn't tell you off the top of my head. It's something like, for a first-time applicant, 20 or so % chance of winning a grant at the first time.
Up to how much?
It's about $175K, I think, for a phase 1 grant.
Can go up to 300 sometimes.
I mean, it could. So NIH is very interesting, and I don't know how it works with other agencies. There are other SBIR granting agencies within the federal government, but they actually have the authority to exceed caps if needed. So I have seen phase 1 grants of $300K, but they're very rare. Most of them are between $150 or $200 or something like that. And again, it's proof of concept work. And then phase 2 grants could be much more, $1.5 million. I've seen $2 million grants. So again, they have the authority to exceed if needed. It all depends on the budget and what you're proposing for that budget. But there, it's really to get into the nitty-gritty of product development once you've got the proof of concept done. They've got a couple of other opportunities. You have to check at various times. One point during a congressional recess, some of the programs were temporarily halted. I think direct to phase 2 was temporarily halted. But there's also something called the fast track, which would enable a company, as soon as they met their phase 1 objectives, to move directly to phase 2 and draw down from phase 2 with the agreement of the program official. So again, there's a few different kinds of grants, and it's really best, before anyone even thinks of applying, to talk to the SBIR program coordinator of the institute where your technology really fits in. So if it's something related to diabetes, it would be NIDDK. If it's something related to sleep apnea, it would be NHLBI. So just know where your technology fits in. And as you mentioned, we have a wonderful program at BioHealth Innovation. Again, the only one, probably the most original in the entire country, where we will pair up entrepreneurs from our region with grant writers in our federal funding assistance program. They won't write the grant for you, but they will review it and make sure that you're hitting all the high points and are targeting it appropriately for the phase that you're going after. not easy money to get, and it does take a long time. Again, SBIR does publish the stats of how much time on average it's taking from review to approval. And then there's quite an extensive review process within the NIH, again, that's published on their website, so I won't go into it. But in general, I tell entrepreneurs that it probably is about a year from start to finish, if not 18 months, because you may have to resubmit if you're not scored well the first time around. So it takes a long time. It's hard money to get, but if you can get it, it's gold.
So patience and persistence are very important when working on the SBIR program.
And if you fail, if you try and don't succeed, I don't want to say fail, but if you try and don't succeed the first time, you try again. Always take the feedback that you're getting from the peer review, even if it seems like insane, which I have heard. Always take that feedback seriously and realize that if somebody did not understand what you were putting in your grant, make it very clear next time around.
And I think one of the things unique about NIH and what you mentioned, Dr. Jody Black, are trying to accomplish is with the money that is invested by Congress and we, the taxpayers, into NIH, they have a dual mission. One is really to increase the quality of life for patients through unique research that's done with medical devices, therapeutics, biologics, or many other things which research is done. With that basic research, how do you advance that into the marketplace to where it can really impact a patient in the future? And I think that's where really the team you're building is trying to assist in increasing the amount of commercial success and the money that's invested by NIH in these early stage technologies and entrepreneurs throughout the country.
Absolutely. The products that we are working on have to have a market. They have to have a channel for getting to the market. They have to be in companies that understand how to be structured appropriately and how to have the kind of strategy that will be interesting to investors and corporate strategics, or if their plan is to go be commercially successful, how to do that. So we are working on making these companies commercially successful, helping them to identify their appropriate channels of getting to the market, models, financial models that would make sense, connecting them with resources, people, mentorship, investors, commercial partners that would really help them get to the finish line. We can't do it alone. It's going to take a village. But luckily, we have an amazing team. We've done some wonderful things for the companies that we're currently experimenting with and are trying to figure out how to scale this up so that all the NIH institutes can benefit from things like helping a digital health company identify the pharma companies that have pipeline products that are totally within their therapeutic area space so that they can work on deals with them. Helping them to get in front of investors at conferences like RESI.
What's RESI?
It is a investment conference, a biotech investment conference for early stage companies. So we do a lot of things for companies to help to prepare and connect them. And the goal is that they should be commercially viable and commercially successful.
And this is somewhat of a pilot program within NIH. And how do you envision this thing growing or expanding in the future?
We're talking about that right now. And it will be, we have a wonderful new office that is going to be working on this. It's called the SEED office within the Office of the Director. We have a new director, Matt McMahon, who has come on board, again, following Jody from the OTEC office at NHLBI. So we are going to be working on launching this and making it available to all NIH-backed companies of a certain stage. There are a lot of new initiatives that are being discussed that I won't talk about here, but even today, I mean, NIH has been doing a wonderful job of having its companies showcased at conferences like BIO, the Biotech Industry Organization we just had a couple months ago in Philadelphia. So every year, BIO has been getting about 80 of our companies, 28 of which will actually pitch in the Innovation Showcase. And again, we prepare those companies and prepare them for their one-on-one partnering meetings. NIH has been doing a really wonderful job of going beyond just funding in many different ways. Besides for the investor showcase strategy, which we're currently working on, I don't know how many people realize that NIH also has pre-IND programs. Again, hard to get into, but NCATS has one, NINDS has one, NCI has one. NIH will actually do for a drug company their pre-IND work for them. Again, it's services in kind. They don't expect any equity in return. It's really an amazing resource. Nobody else in the universe really does this.
We're glad you're there to educate people about this resource, Ethel. We're talking with Dr. Ethel Rubin, who's an entrepreneur in residence at National Institute of Health. And another thing that Ethel is passionate about is opportunities for women in biotech. There's an organization called Women in Bio. Ethel's active in that. Why don't you talk a little bit about as you see the future for opportunities for women in biotech?
So unlike what you may be hearing in the media, I think the opportunities are unlimited. I personally have never experienced any kind of bias, at least that I could identify. And I see women at all levels of management, from the C-suite on down. I don't think there's anything about being a woman that would stop or prevent or hinder you from achieving any of your professional goals. And if you look around, you can find a mentor who's doing something that is of interest to you that you can learn from. Women in Bio is a wonderful organization for promoting and supporting women in biotech. I highly encourage everyone to join a chapter if they're not already part of it. They've got all sorts of interesting programs. They've got podcasts. They've got webinars. They've got networking events. I actually just moderated an event for them last week here in Maryland. You know, I sit really in the intersection between the business and the investment side. And I would say that, you know, rather than talking about women in biotech, where I don't see so many of the issues, or I think that women can achieve what they're after, women in investing, I think, have a long way to go. Look, I have relationships with the Angel Capital Association. I have relationships with the National Venture Capital Association. Clearly, I'm involved with many different investment groups and investment funds. You still rarely see a woman in the investment decision suite when it comes to a VC. Some of them are more well known than others, but it's still a rarity. The people making decisions on the investments, those managing directors and the partner level are still generally male. And that's where I think we have a long way to go in biotech investing world.
So do you see that as one of your personal goals in the future, to find ways to get more women involved in the venture investing world?
Absolutely. I know women who want to be involved in the venture investing world. I'm one. Yeah. You know, obviously I've been playing a role there for quite a while, but not within a VC fund. I think that we definitely need more women. It is a professional goal of mine. I know there are many women who want to get involved, but how? The way VCs work is they recruit either directly from business schools, where you come in as an associate and 2 years later, you're rarely promoted. You have to find something else to do. Or you are recruited in from a McKinsey or a Bain consulting group. They're not typical paths that people think about when they're getting a PhD. There are a couple like Flagship Ventures, which do hire PhDs. It's really hard to get your foot in the door. There is no one way. And it's not like if you know someone who came in one way that's an obvious in for you. It's a really hard nut to crack. It's a little bit obscure and opaque. I can't say that the VCs are even out there looking for talent. It's a very opaque and obscure world. We should talk to somebody who recruits for VCs and try to understand a little bit more. But they're really looking for people with MBAs from the financial world or from the consulting world. If you are an entrepreneur who has had multiple exits, then you can come on board as an EIR within a VC. But if I actually counted the number of women that ran their own VC fund in the biotech space, it's the fingers of one hand.
Well, you're young in your career, Ethel, so you have many years to achieve that as another thing to put as one of your milestones. So let's talk a little bit about the future. And also with your experience, maybe the listeners would like to hear some of your words of advice that you might have for biotech entrepreneurs out there who might be looking for partners, looking for money, looking for strategics to work with.
First of all, kudos to all our entrepreneurs. You are doing the hardest work in the world outside of being a mother or a father. It is hard work. You have to keep at it. And at the same time, you have to balance realities. So try again definitely has to be a mantra. But if you're getting a lot of advice, And I'm not just saying a couple of naysayers, but if you're getting a lot of advice about pivoting your commercial plan or changing something about your strategy, really think about it, especially if you're getting it from an objective resource. And this can be hard because if you've approached 3, 4, 5 investors, everyone has an idea for you that is going to be different than the one before. It's really hard to hit that golden medium and know that you're on the right path because a lot of what you're doing is being done for the first time ever. And there may be no right and wrong. It's just a matter of opinion. In general, I would say that if you're raising funds, you're going to have to kiss 300 frogs before you find your prince. So we used to say you're going to be on an 18-month roadshow, but I don't know how long it will take you to get to 300, but actually count them and tell me if I'm wrong. But it really does take 300 frogs that you got to go through to find your one prince. And it's hard because a lot of these investors will tell you that they're interested in your company, but yet you need to get a lead. So finding that champion investor is very important. And I won't go into that too much. I'm really trying to keep it high level for advice for entrepreneurs. One other thing that I feel could be worked out better is think about who your customer is and how you reach them. If you're trying to get entrenched within a customer base where there is no consensus, for example, consensus clinical decision making or consensus on how to treat certain patient population, and you're trying to force consensus, well, if you're not a J&J and not a Medtronic or a Boston Scientific, that's going to be hard. Think about that a little bit. If you're a pharma entrepreneur, a biotech entrepreneur developing a small molecule therapeutic or a gene therapy, watch carefully what your predecessors have done before you and try to find out what works and what doesn't work and try to find out why things don't work. That'll help save you a lot of aggravation and pushback from investors or strategics. And finally, networking is probably the most important thing you can do. It really takes a village. It's not 2 guys in their garage anymore. It really takes a village to get out there and get connected. Use every resource you can to make sure that you are spreading, far and wide beyond your region, beyond your space. Go to every potential showcase that you can. At the very least, you're going to get a lot of experience presenting and talking with different stakeholders. And finally, I want everyone to realize that regulatory and reimbursement is still a bottleneck. And regulatory has gone a long way in this country. FDA has become more and more transparent, encouraging entrepreneurs to come to them at the earliest stages for pre-IND, pre-IND, and now pre-IND. So when you start to have an idea of what your product is going to look like, that's the time to approach FDA, even though it's very early. We don't have the same fears that we had years ago. Don't go in front of the FDA until you're practically done, because then they'll tell you you have to do X, Y, and Z. It's not like that anymore. Better to be prepared. Reimbursement, on the other hand, is still very difficult. CMS, private payers, it's a difficult landscape here. So try to think about that early on. Try to talk to payers early on. Try to reach out to the medical directors of the private payers early on and try to get as much information as you can about how reimbursement will work with your technology and innovation. Granted, a lot of what we are doing in our space with gene therapies, with gene editing is really early. But you have to start to form these relationships and get this input early on, because otherwise it can totally derail your plans.
Very wise words of wisdom from someone who interacts with several hundred entrepreneurs per year. So you're speaking from real experience, not from a textbook. That's
right. The last thing I want to do is hear from another entrepreneur that they're in the middle of their clinical trial and have not gotten FDA input on it.
And it's right down the road for those in Maryland or the BioHealth Capital Region. Just pick up the phone or get in your car and go talk to somebody.
Right. Or spend $500,000 on some regulatory consultant where you really could have just knocked on FDA's door yourself.
And gotten the same answers.
Thank you.
Yeah. Those are wise words of wisdom on how to use your frugal dollars more wisely. We've been talking with Dr. Ethel Rubin, an entrepreneur in residence at BioHealth Innovation and the National Institute of Health. First time we've actually brought someone on to the BioTalk Talk podcast.
I'm so honored.
That's been related to BHI, and we've had about 36 others that we've done, but I think we should start showcasing more of our own because there's a lot of talent within the BHI team. So, Ethel, thank you for coming on BioTalk today. And before I close, one of the things I've been reminded, we've been doing these for about 2 years now, and what we'd like to remind the listeners who enjoy BioTalk, please favorite, like, or subscribe to the podcast because then you will be made aware as when new ones are published that you will get them instantaneously. Also, it's nice to know that people like the podcast that we're doing with BioTalk. We've had some very favorable comments. If you have any constructive criticism, what we can do to improve or suggestions of people that would be great guests for BioTalk, let us know personally. You know that I'm very accessible. So this is Rich Bendis, your host of BioTalk, thanking Dr. Ethel Rubin again for appearing on the latest edition of BioTalk, and it will probably appear within the next week to 10 days.
Thank you so much for having me here. And you know that if you're NIH backed, we have your back.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to BioTalk with Rich Bendis.